team's going to come up. They're going to run through a presentation. They're all looking at each other to see who's going to go first, but one of them will be. Just in terms of the way we've formatted the report for this meeting, and it will look like this going forward. So team, if you guys want to come up to the front and just get your presentation set up. The way we've formatted the report this time round is at each cycle of reporting there's going to be a real focus on a particular project. In this case it's Tūtera. We've added into the report some work on forest harvest activities up there. So essentially the focus today is on Tūtera. That's why there's a lot more text. There's a presentation around it. We've taken the rest of the report as read. So those people who are tagged into those other projects are not here. I can answer questions as best as I can between myself and those gathered in response. And if I can't provide a response, we'll get answers come back to you. So balance of the paper taken as read, focus on Tūtera, and I'll hand over to the team. Looks like Ben's leading us.
Go for it.
Is there a presentation?
There was a presentation.
Didn't we have a presentation?
Hotspots.
14. Page 41.
Thanks, Liz.
Tēnā koutou katoa ngā māngai o te hapori, ngā māngai o ngā tangata whenua, ko te kaiwhakahaere ngāhiri o te kaunihira nei, nā ku te timatatanga o tēnei hui. Tēnā whakarāturanga, nō reira tēnā koutou. Hi everyone, I'm the Forestry Management Advisor for the Council, and I'll kick things off just with an update on the forestry that's happening up at Tūtera. I'll just shoot through. So there we have obviously the pine forest. These two blocks here, well that one there and that one there, planted prior to us purchasing the regional park. Back in, those were planted around 92 and 93. And the block here of younger pines planted in 98 once the block was purchased. These former blocks planted by the Guthrie Smith Trust and the Landcare Trust for the purposes of erosion protection, now all coming up for logging. So that's the harvest plan for the logging. What we've tried to do, and what we have done, is we've kept all the roading and the skid sites, the processing sites of the ridge tops, which obviously saves constructing roads along the more erosion-prone faces and minimise the sediment loss that way. There are the different arrows show the way that the logs will be hauled up to the processing sites, and we do have some natural sort of boundaries in the way that it's going to be logged, which means we can compartmentalise logging and save clear felling the whole lot in one go, which is obviously going to be high risk in terms of sediment loss and what have you. To get access to the forest, we have had to construct a few new roads. This area of the forest on the southern side of the Kahukanui stream will be taken out by a road that's currently being constructed over to the west here. And all of these trees north of the stream are going to have to go out via a different route, and I'll go over those now. So the first access road there is across the property of the Brazier Estate. The solid orange line was the length of road that was constructed over the last summer, which was about 1,300 metres. The dotted line is what's currently being completed, and that's about 3 weeks away from completion, and that will take us right to the Kahukanui stream here. And as I was saying, that all of the logs from this area of forest here will go up via that road. A couple of photos there earlier on of the road during the construction stages. So what they've done there is they've benched the batters off to save them being too high, which of course leads to a greater risk of slumping and erosion, and also allows anything that does slip to fall down onto this bench rather than straight into the water table. that area now, and all the batters like that because they have been stripped of the topsoil and therefore not, it's a bit of a struggle to get grass seed grown on them. They've been hydroseeded with a mix of grass and legume seed mixed with glue and sawdust and other things and sprayed on. The lower photo here, you can see the contractors have stripped the topsoil separately, so in the rehabilitation stage they can do what they've done up here, which is spread the topsoil back over, and we can seed that just by conventional methods, throwing the grass seed around, and that will take really well. We've got various options for logging the northern pines, which I pointed out earlier, and we will make the final decision on that based on consultation with the party who does the logging, because they'll have some views too. But these are our options here basically. These first 4 options are all much the same with slight variations, going out to Ridgemount Road. Some of the things we're not happy about with this route are the extent to which it extends into the native there, and also the extent of fill that would be required to build the road up to the grade required. There are pros and cons of each option, and we're still working through those. Following the logging, we will need to make, prior to logging, we will need to make a decision around the post-harvest replanting. Earlier on, we were looking at the forest in isolation in terms of what to replant it with, but we've now extended that to looking at the park as a whole property and taking a bit more of a holistic view in terms of the land use of the whole park. And within the next couple of weeks, one of the land management team would have completed the farm management plan for the park, and that will give us a good steer on any land use decisions we should be making in terms of changing any of the current land use. And when we make the decision, we will need to factor in various variables. This is a land use capability map of the park, and obviously down to a very fine level of detail. But we will need to weigh in the practicalities of the track network and maintaining that and maintaining views over the lake, and also the paddock boundaries where the fences are, so we don't end up spending
Do you know Jim Hutchhead from here? He married one of the daughters.
This one.
And from the engineering side of things, these are the 2 bridge sites. So the
After the
West Bridge site is,
What a good wicket here.
the engineers have been dealing with the bridges basically. I haven't had a lot to do with them, but suffice to say that they are in the pipeline and soon to be completed.
Yeah, so we're just going through the design process on those 2 bridges. And we can see why they're...
I think that one's good enough.
That's not the one we've built. So that's the...
Really fast.
We'll push Fenton over first, eh? If it's 4-wheel drive.
Yeah, so that's an old truck deck where the first bridge site is. That'll be taken out and replaced. And there will be a gauging site for measuring water flow and other water variables put underneath the bridge. And that's design of that there.
So is the bridge going to be just one span from bank to bank?
Bank to bank. And the second bridge site there, which is over the Kahapea. The other big piece of work going on there is the sediment trap to go on the flat. I'll zoom out so you get a better idea of where that is. So what we were looking at in that close-up is the flat here. So obviously during logging we'll be carrying out all due diligence to minimise any sediment creation in the way that we log it. And there'll be on-site sediment control close to where all the action's happening, but the sediment trap design that's happening down on the flats there is to protect in the event of a big event during after.
Does through you, Chair, does that proposed bund satisfy the concerns expressed by Blue Macmillan as to its placement?
I can answer that one.
Can you? Yep.
It was discussed with Blue Macmillan on site, so the position of that fund is as agreed, consultation with various stakeholders. So that was a meeting I believe Paul attended. So yeah, that has been consulted on.
And I guess on that, just to add, because the sediment is a significant risk, so this is a base proposal. We're currently working through our procurement strategy with a forestry partner, and one of the things we'll be talking to that partner about prior is the harvest planning.
Yep.
And certainly they'll have a lot of commentary and good ideas about how to set this up properly. So it's about garnering information from a range of stakeholders and also industry leaders to help sort of manage this issue.
Thank you, Chris.
So when you say a bund, well, effectively, because I don't see the word bund in that context, but what you're effectively talking about is a dam across the waterway, so the water comes in, slows for such a significant period of time that all the sediment drops out, and then only clear water will flow over the top of the dam.
Yeah,
That what the-
that's correct. So this is really a stopgap for a major event. The area will be at risk once it's felled in terms of sediment.
I get that.
And part of that is getting, I guess, the sequencing right, and it might actually be better to log it over a 4 or 5 year period rather than sort of a big hit to help manage that risk as well.
Do all loggers do this?
Yeah, that was,
It seems to me this is how it should be done.
Yeah.
Are we following best practice, and are we requiring everybody else to do this?
So we are approaching this slightly differently from a normal forest owner. The primary reason this forest is here is because of soil conservation, so it is a high risk site. Our approach is all around managing the risk of sediment and the health and safety risk. A lot of this is quite steep country. So they're the two, main things that we're trying to address through this. So, and it is also an example of best practice. So we want to pick a forestry partner who can help us with that and is up to the challenge of the site, being looked at as an example of what should be done.
I get that, but to take the next step forward, and my question is this going to be what we require as a council for all loggers to meet as best practice?
So sediment traps are required under the NES for the harvest management plans that are now approved by council. This is probably gold standard though in terms of the scale of that. So this is, as I understand it, we're designing this for a major event, and we'd need to come back to you with a view on whether or not we would require this level of intervention everywhere that there is harvests like this.
But it's the old saying, good as gold, so that's what we want. And the other thing is that when you actually harvest and there is an event, that's when we get the problem. It's not an everyday rainfall, so these things are put in for extreme events to stop.
Not quite. So sediment traps at a more localised scale, so in gullies, do have an important role for it with even moderate rainfall. So you still do get sediment runoff from both the harvest period and soon after. This is going the extra mile and saying, well, if we get a really big event, how do we? Because we're trying to protect the lake. I would not expect under the current rules for us to be requiring this level of protection everywhere. However, having said that, if the catchment was directly proximal to a lake, then in all probability we would be expecting this level of engineering.
But I'm not sure I'm agreeing with you there. Is that when we have the maximum amount of sediment load is when we have extreme events.
Yep.
That's when the water's got sufficient energy to carry it.
Yep.
And that's what does the most damage. So why wouldn't we be having sediment traps which are capable of coping with extreme events?
can answer this one at the back and maybe come up and point to some stuff. Great.
Happy to come.
Yeah. So we are doing that, Rick. So what we're
I
working
think,
on.
so David, the question's more in relation to other foresters and the
Yeah.
extent to which we, through our consenting and regulatory arm,
Yeah.
are putting this kind of imposition on all
Yeah.
forest.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I understand the question. It was more the detail. So
Yep.
what Councillor Barker was saying was we're not designing for a certain magnitude of event there. So the reason why we're doing all this, the test pits there that are indicated here is to actually design the bund to cope with that extreme event. We're doing a range of events for that, Rick. So we're looking at a 10-year, a 50-year, a 100-year event. And we're designing a formal spillway in here as well. We're also looking at the sensitivity associated with this channel here. So there's an existing overflow. So we're looking at if we dig an interception drain or deepen this interception drain, can we take some more sediment off during an event and divert that away from the lake? So we're looking at all those things, the extreme cases, to answer your question.
So whether we are requiring design to cope with a 1 in 100 year event for all forest harvest activity, that's something we'd need to come back and provide you with a view on.
That's the question I have, because I'm mindful of your own words. You said if we don't do something about sediment runoff off this region, all we'll be left with is bare rock. And you're right. So when do we get the maximum sediment outflow?
Yep.
It's during extreme events. So if we've got to protect ourselves against sediment in our rivers, we need to do it for extreme events, just not the average pitter-patter of rain Sunday night.
Yeah, look, and there was a report that was commissioned recently and released 2 days ago by the Environmental Defence Society and Forest and Bird on the adequacy of the National Environmental Standard on plantation forestry. It's critical of how stringent that is, and I had a discussion with the Minister for the Environment, the Minister of Forestry about that this morning, and the view is that the regulations need further tightening in these sorts of areas, and so that's something which government is working through presently, and we could expect there'll be further change to the regs.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Further question? Why are we harvesting this? Why don't we just leave it?
$3.5 million. The forestry owners' money.
So Ben, you can probably
Yeah.
cover this. Yes.
So if we don't harvest them, the only other options are to leave them there, in which case the transition to native forest as it eventually comes through wouldn't be a tidy one with the radiata as it gets to a certain size and the steep land will start to topple over. So I think we're much better to deal with it in a managed way. And also with it being a regional park, we can't sort of have that staggered approach too much over time.
I'm challenged by your answers, but I'll leave it at that. The one other question is the road that you're creating. Is there going to be ongoing public access through that road?
No, it's only a commercial use road.
Just to further to Neil's question, I presume that you guys
Mr.
come back to-
Barker, Mr. Bowie, and I had my hand up too. You bloody bully over
Oh,
there.
you told me 4
Mr.
times.
Bowie, please, can we,
So
you want to get through this today?
through that bun and those so-called safeguards, would that have stopped the Tolaga Bay problems?
Oh, that's a good question.
The Tolaga Bay problem was about slash, wasn't it, and forestry?
Slash and lines.
This is quite different, I think, the situation, Councillor. Yes.
So you're going to get no slash after
Because if they leave them.
the harvesting?
So I think I can add some value there. What we're still doing is working through a procurement plan with a partner. It is advantageous for us to minimise the slash, and so that's part of our contracting strategy. But exactly the methodology we use, because there's several ways we can log the forest, it still needs to be worked through with that partner. So we do want to minimise the slash, but we haven't yet decided on the technique that we'll be using.
I'd add that this site's close enough to Panpac for it to be economic to recover a good portion of the slash for pulping purposes. So we're probably in a fortunate situation there.
Mr. Chair,
Chair, can you?
thank you.
I get why you're not leaving the forest. I disagree with my colleague here, but is the undergrowth natives now? If you look at that forest, is it bare or is it growing up?
It sort of varies. There's a lot of area where it is reasonably bare and just pine needles, but there is native undergrowth coming through in other parts of it. Yes.
What percentage? What would it be? 50% or 20% or?
I would say, and we're talking about sort of natives about yay high, likes of karamu and a few ferns and things. Percentage basis, maybe 30%, maybe. A lot of blackberry and a lot of beer pitchers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you for recognising me, Chair. I appreciate that.
That's time.
Let's come back to the point that Neil made about the forest you've got there. You're going to cut it down, and then you've said you're going to come back to us with a plan of what you're going to replant. So are you contemplating replanting some or all of it in natives, other different species, and have a variety there? What's your sort of thinking at this stage? Or are you just going to go straight back and plant us right here out of P15?
Well, yeah, I've got a view on that, but I guess at the end of the decision will be the balance between the investment that's been made in the harvest infrastructure and not just the financial investment, but also the environmental investment, bearing in mind that once you put that roading in and those skid sites in, they're in and you don't have to disturb that ground again, really. And versus the other various other values in the park, the fact that it is a regional park, biodiversity values and the cultural values and the various other values. So there's a big decision to be made here.
Further to that, Chair, who is actually going to make that decision? Because at the end of the day, there was a community working group that's put together to consider the question of what's going to be replanted post-harvest, and they had a particular view which went to a lot of effort to come up with, and I would hate to see that work has been ignored.
No, so Councillor Bailey, that work will be coming back for comment to Council. We're not at a point of doing that yet because, again, we need to work with our forestry partner to make sure that actually makes sense, so we will bring that base work back, but it might need a bit of fine tuning. So that is our intention.
So I'm interested in the liability after Mark's presentation this morning. Has that work been done as well in terms of the carbon market?
So we've done some work around that, haven't we, Ben?
Yeah, we're covered as far as carbon, yeah.
But how can you be if you don't know what you're going to replant?
Yeah, well, I guess that is a consideration. No, actually, the analysis was done on the basis of planting a certain percentage back in native. So there's as an extreme case.
I'll move.
We haven't finished yet, Chair. You're only halfway through.
The chair's anxious to get moving here.
It's the forestry part, Chair.
What are you moving?
You've moved the trees.
Yeah, that's me.
Is that it?
Yep.
No, so there is more. From a forestry perspective, there's a whole lot more.
Yeah.
Billy Bruff, probably known to some of you, Billy was engaged to work with the team on the development of our integrated catchment management plan. I think Billy's going to run through that, and then we're going to also be having Andy, anybody else, and Andrew. So there's more information to come on farm plans and then the work in the lake itself. So there's a bit of depth here. Bear with us.
Good afternoon, committee members. So the Integrated Catchment Management Plan, as a quick summary, is in final draft. It's currently with the project partners for internal review. It will then go back to the Lake Te Tira Governance Group for their consideration and back to the community to see what the community at large think, which is important because the photograph you see in the PowerPoint there is the first hui we had with the community in, I think it was June last year. Particularly robust hui, as these always are. I think in my view, of my experience in dealing with the community, it's one of the better hui I've been to where everyone was engaged. People actually wanted to talk, didn't have to, as a facilitator, extract things out of people. In fact, people were amping to get to the whiteboard to write their views down and values. And as such, we had a tremendous amount of information that we could then start to collate as the basis for the management plan. The management plan itself has been developed sequentially. So we started off with this particular process, developed a vision and some, based on values the community gave us, and some objectives on the FIF, objectives that you've seen in the report you've read. And then we started to add the various components to the back end of the plan, and some of those you discussed today being the forestry. But being an integrated plan, we've also picked up on a series of work streams that Council currently undertake to ensure that all the services you deliver inside that catchment can be done effectively and efficiently, and that if you are looking at, for example, retiring certain parts of certain properties that might be critical source areas, if there are some biodiversity benefits that can be gained from extending certain areas to connect to existing remnants, that they're looked at. And furthermore, if you're looking at a subsidy scheme to incentivise those things, what other funding initiatives might be available to that particular landowner? And it's collecting those sorts of thoughts together in the one document and suggesting that it's not a singular stream, there's a collective that can be looked at. And I suppose one of the key aspects of it is it's a community document effectively written based on the community values and potentially should be administered by that community. What I would term collective activism. If you empower the community to make change and you provide them the tools to do that, there's far greater likelihood they will, particularly if I've held the pen, but they've given the ideas in terms of what the vision should be, the time frame for that vision, and specific objectives. So that's effectively the basic framing of it. There's some editorial niceties that need to be completed to make this thing work. And those things are around sequencing. For example, the plantation forestry harvesting you've heard about. What other mitigation or management interventions are occurring at the same time that could be sequenced around those things, so everything flows effectively, and other kind of things that we need to tidy up through our internal review. I think as a short summary, Mr Chair, that's a good starting place.
Have you got a map of the catchment that you can show us?
Actually, no, I don't. I thought you might already know it all.
It's quite narrow, isn't it? We do, yeah.
It's a smallish catchment, yes.
Yeah, smallish, but
it's not
quite
particularly
narrow.
large. Did we have one in the presentation, Jolene, by chance?
No, we don't.
Yeah. It's actually one of those things. It's a very information-rich catchment. A lot of technical reports being written on it, and there are. If you look at the reports and put them alongside each other, everyone's got a different view of how big their catchment really is, and it's one of those last-minute things that we're dealing with at the moment to actually articulate what that catchment looks like. So we have got a map. It's just that.
How many dairy farms in the catchment? Steph,
Thanks, Andrew.
So it might be a nice segue to get Andrew to come up and run through the farm plan kind of bit. Allied to this is there's two other parts to the presentation. One is some work that Andrew's going to do or has been involved in farm planning in the catchment, and we'll get you a picture of the catchment and we'll circulate that. I thought we had one floating around.
Just that one there.
I'll send you a digital copy. And then Andy's going to talk about the science stuff. But I guess the work that Billy's done sets up for us the roadmap of the work ahead of us. And for me, it's going to be a key document for us to form our resourcing needs and priorities to come back to you around long-term plan discussions. So community views, values, aspirations gives us a direction of travel. We then need to figure out how we line up to support those in existing activities or new activities that we might bring to you through long-term plan and other processes.
Sorry, Chet, before Billy takes off, would you say that the community is still positively engaged in the whole process?
I would say yes, given the last governance group meeting I attended, they were wanting to see the plan.
Yep.
And had not forgotten that we'd undertaken this bit of work, and where is it?
Excellent. Thank you.
Are the farmers engaged? The big landowners? Oh, here we go.
Let's go.
Right, shall I get into mine? I can answer that question. Look, part of the program's outcomes was to provide environmental farm plans for properties where we think they were needed or where they were needed, I guess you'd say. So we've estimated there's probably about 24, 25 properties in that area that are requiring farm plans, environmental farm plans. The catchment itself is about 3,500 hectares, so it isn't a big catchment. It's a long, slim one, starting at the lakes itself, around the lakes, and then shoots up Papakeri Stream. So quite a few of the properties that we'll be working on will have land outside there, but we'll be focusing our efforts and also our funding on those areas in the catchment itself. We have commenced the farm plans. We're now on our 6th property. See? All right.
Just use the keyboard. Use the keyboard and use the arrows. It's easier.
Yeah, there we go. Right, as far as the environmental farm plans go, the key process there is to actually assess the soil and water resources and work out how the farming activities are actually impacting on those and working out what we can do about that. We also are bringing in biodiversity and biosecurity into that process as well, so it becomes pretty comprehensive, the plan that we develop. This is a example of probably one of the biggest farms and one of the most comprehensive plans we'll be doing in the catchment. It's on one of the most erodible areas in this catchment as well. That's why we prioritised it, as well as the land around the lake. This is Bruce Tomlinson's place. You might not be able to see the detail there, but there's quite a bit of that property that's hatched over as far as what works we require or what management requirements are needed on that property. In the plan, from that we develop an action plan. This is just a copy of that, and we're estimating there's about $170,000 worth of works required on this farm alone. So it's fairly big scale. And what we've done with these plans is we've broken them into work units. So this is all those units combined. And if I narrow down. Oh, the other thing too is we're not actually working with a blank canvas here. This is some of the plantings that have already occurred on this property of Bruce's. This was carried out 7 or 8 years ago by Bruce in cooperation with the Regional Council. It's probably one of the best examples of space planting with poplars that I've seen in the region. So there are things happening here, and if you have a look at the catchment, particularly around the lakes, there's been a dramatic difference in change in the last 25 years from a predominantly pastoral catchment. There's a lot of work done. In fact, the lakes catchment itself, which is about 500 hectares, is only 20% pastoral use in that area now. So big changes already there. Obviously, we've got to do some more. This is just one of the job units on that property. It's about a $35,500 project. This will be carried out this year. So we have the plants, most of the plants available there, and the planter available. There'll be a fence going in. It's a combination of slope stability planting with redwoods, eucalypts, poplars, as well as natives. So we're actually tailoring species into the right areas, we believe. This is being funded through the ECS program, or Erosion Control Scheme, and so what we're trying to do is drag in those other funding sources into this process. The natives in this area here, we're getting $1 billion tree funding for that. That application's in at present as well. So we're trying to do a lot more, I guess, just than what the FIF and its funding base would have given us. We're not just focusing, though, on slope stability. This is another part of this plan on this property. This is a riparian program, about 2.5 hectares, I think, somewhere around there. And we're looking at probably about a $40,000 program for this. This probably won't go ahead if we can't get $1 billion tree funding for this one. That will significantly help us and also the landowner in being able to afford to get this done. But to me, quite vital. It's on the Papakeri Stream, and it's just above the lake. It's only half a kilometre away from the lake, so yeah, very important place.
Is that the road? Is that the main road?
That's the main road beside it, yep.
Yeah, no, that is a top priority, that piece.
Yeah. It would be a real showpiece too if we can get it
It would
going. Yep, I agree. We do have issues, and this is why we're looking at the biosecurity, biodiversity side of things. But as far as biosecurity goes, just upstream from that is a lot of Japanese honeysuckle, which just is so invasive for any riparian planting that we have to sort of get into those types of control programs as well before we can start things like this.
And can't you slot that into our riparian planting scheme?
We only provide plants at a discounted rate for our riparian planting scheme, that as far as that goes at present, but I understand there's moves possibly to change that.
Just as an aside, can you give us a quick update on what's happening with the Japanese honeysuckle? I mean, it's rampant right through that whole corridor. Isn't there a bug or a fungus or something they're trying to establish?
Yeah, I can't answer that apart from I know that there has been a bug introduced into this area, but
So
maybe at a future meeting.
Nobody here
or
can help
something.
with that, so we could probably bring some information back on the next.
I'm getting some calls
update.
about that
Yep.
at the moment. Yeah.
Okay.
we're not just trying to create plans that attract funds, and that these plans also require or request that people or educate some of the farmers as to practices as well. And we look at road maintenance and forestry areas, and also effective buffer strips and cultivated areas. These things are commented on and gone through with the farmer as well. So it's really an education process as well. And it's fine. It's basically a lot of it's just fine tuning. There was a huge buffer strips up through this paddock here, apart from a bit at the bottom, so it doesn't need much to actually change these things.
Can you describe the red lines? What are we looking at?
Oh, sorry, the red lines here, this is actually this has come out of this environmental report, and the commentary that went with this is where you should have actually left grass and as a buffer strip when you cultivated this block of land or sprayed it. In doing these plans, we've come across some quite exciting opportunities, and this is a riparian area that's that the landowner's wanting to be developed. It's a 9.6 hectare lifestyle block, and this is right beside Bruce Tomlinson's northern boundary. So it actually feeds from Bruce's place about 150 hectares of his highly erodible land. This landowner was keen to do this big incised gully, put this incised gully into riparian and wetland areas. Again, it's a big program. We're talking about 3.5 odd hectares here. I think 3.6 hectares. So again, we're looking at $30,000 to $40,000 to actually get this established. And with a landowner that hasn't got much in the way of fundings, again, we're looking at that Billion Tree Fund, and the application's going on at present to get the funding to make this affordable. On the other side of the lake, we're looking at another wetland development, and this is just north of the Arboretum, and that's that blue and white area there, 4 hectares of what is now pastoral land. We're looking at developing into, well, with the landowner developing into wetland. The reason being is we just don't like wetlands, but as you can see from the photograph, the black and white photograph, that is a cyclone bowler, or post-cyclone bowler photograph. It's an area where a hell of a lot of sediment ended up. So if we can enhance that wetland as a capture area, and as far as a water quality area as well, a quality improvement area, I think we'll be, we're heading much in the right direction in these areas. So when we looked at when we did a survey of the catchment for the project to start off with, it was we did a vegetation vegetation part of that survey, and wetlands didn't come up as a significant source. In fact, less than 1 hectare. So between this one and the one over on Easton's Place, we're looking at 4, 5, 6, about 6 hectares of wetland going into these areas, and we know that the wetlands are important for water quality and sediment control. With this wetland, again, we're looking at probably about $140,000 for this. We don't quite know how we're going to fund it yet, but we're going to find ways. There is engineering requirements needed, and our engineers in August, September are going to be looking at how we can hydrologically sustain a wetland in this area. It might just be bundling the drains that have been put in there historically. We'll need to build a
a sediment trap at the top of it because we do have 150 hectares of forestry above it, and we want to ensure that that wetland has some longevity as well. We don't want to have it filled up the first year. So yeah, a big program. The landowners are very keen. They're sourcing funding or looking at funding sources as well. So these programs are on the cards, and the FIF program is, as well as the erosion control scheme money and things like the $1 billion tree funds, has just meant that we can actually look bigger and better and at a better scale than we would have possibly done just with FIF funding. So it's all looking in the right direction as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, that it?
No,
That's it, thank you.
so unless there's any questions for Andrew.
No, but that's fantastic work.
And look, just to make a point too, that Andrew's done some outstanding work for us at Tūtera and also Ahuriri. So this is all the stuff that is kind of central to our erosion control and our focus back on the land. It's been an awesome bit of work. So really pleased to see that this work's chugging along as well as it is.
Just one thing, who planted those redwoods just north of, there's a paddock of redwoods there, just north of the lake?
Yep.
You know, on the side. So is that private owner, someone?
I think it is, yes.
Can I just make a comment, Chair? Ian, great work. I really enjoyed the way that was presented. I think that's the first time I've had a good look into what actually the outcomes are from the farm environment management plans. And if that's the sort of standard, I think we're well served by what's going to be happening there. So thank you for that presentation. It was excellent.
And in this case, these are voluntary, right? These are basically to be able to access the ECS.
Look, that's, I guess, the beauty of them is that the ownership will be with the farmer. We're doing them for him, and he has to have ownership of it. We work in cooperation with him to get them actioned, and that's where we can actually get
So
the funding.
you've just shown us in a public meeting a farm plan where at the same time the council is refusing Information Act requests to see farm plans prepared under Plan Change 6. Now, it's not a question to you, but I'm just raising it for further
That got James's
reflection.
attention.
I made sure it wasn't the final plan that you saw.
There's a lot of detail that you haven't seen. So yeah, look, there's now a science run through that Andy's going to give in short order.
Okay.
So last segment of the it's not a trifecta. What's
Just while he's setting up, Chair, how many trees are we planting this year? Us.
317,000.
there you go, 370,000. We're at $1.9 million worth of funded projects for this year one, and how many projects? Quite a large number.
370 hectares, roughly.
370,000 trees.
Yeah, 1,000 a hectare.
Yeah, if you took 1,000 stems per hectare, it's not necessarily always 1,000 stems per hectare.
Andy.
Cool. Tēnā koutou katoa. Yes, I've been speaking to you guys for a while. So Andy, scientist for the water quality ecology team. I'll just try and run through a few things really quickly, but I wanted to start with a bit of context first, and I don't think I've presented this before, but the plot behind me shows counts of cyanobacteria. So when there's a lot of these, that's when the lake is unsafe to swim. And you can see quite a sort of a pattern, a cycling, where it's gone from being quite unsafe, lots of cyanobacteria, and then long periods where it's actually been quite nice. And we're currently in one of those long periods.
I suggest you sort of when I spoke to
yeah, sure.
That's great.
Yep, sure. So does that show up? It does, doesn't it? Yeah. So this is only until, when's that, till June 2018. So we're about here and it's still blue. So I'll get back to this a little bit later on, but knowing that things can change like this quite substantially, but also quite meaningfully in terms of what it means in the way we can interact with the lake has been something I've struggled with in terms of coming up with recommendations that might make sense. So I think that's just useful context. You get good and bad years. And then in terms of the three lakes as well that we've got monitoring data for, so Waikapiro is the little lake just at the south of Tūtera, where we've got the air curtain, and Opawahi's a little lake outside of the catchment, where there's a kiwi crash. So if everyone knows those three lakes. But so you'd expect Opawahi to be the best. It's got this fairly nice native bush around it. And Tutira's the one that we sort of talk about the most. And then there's Waikapiro. So in terms of those three lakes, this is the trophic level index. It's just an indication of how eutrophic, how enriched with nutrients the lakes are. And that tends to be associated with algae blooms. So Waikapiro, where we've got the air curtain, has consistently been the sort of in the worst state over the years. Tutira's gone up and down, which roughly reflects that earlier plot I showed. And then just recently we've got Opawahi, which you would expect to be good and has been good up until quite recently, and it's showing this deterioration. So the TLI, the bad stuff is getting worse. And just recently, the last year, Tutira was actually better than Opawahi. So just a bit of complexity, a bit of dynamic workings going on. It just makes it a little bit tricky to always have clean and clear answers. But what I'll focus on today is the air curtain trial. That's where I guess most of the interest has been in terms of questions we get. But I'm happy to answer any questions on science if they haven't been answered during the presentation. So in terms of the air curtain trial, we've had some good things and some bad things. So the first thing which was quite obvious was that the air curtain did thoroughly mix the lake, and that's in contrast with what's happened during the trials in the 70s, where we had a different method, and that didn't quite work. So that was good. We mixed the lake. One thing that's associated with that, though, is that there have been quite frequent power outs, and when those occur, obviously the air curtain's unable to operate, and that just adds a logistic complexity to whether we can get this thing going as much as we want it to. Bottom water oxygen levels have been high, so that's good. Again, that was something that we wanted to happen. But a bad thing, which was a bit of a spanner, was that we had an algae bloom that had established in the lake already. When it bust, it used up all the oxygen throughout the lake, and so we had a large fish kill. So there's good and bad. A bad thing is, and this is also expected, the entire lake warmed up, so you lost the cool water refugia down the bottom. The air curtain mixes the lake, I think everyone here knows, so the idea is to mix the surface and the bottom, and there's meant to be benefits of that, but there are also side effects, and one of those is that you warm the entire lake. So the cool water that often sits down the bottom of these deeper lakes goes away, and so things that like cool water don't have that option anymore. And in saying that, the main thing that we'd be worried about, or some people would be worried about, is the trout. All of the natives have quite high temperature thresholds, but trout do not. And in Waikapiro, that warm water does not appear to be killing the trout. So that's a good thing so far. Cyanobacteria have still been a problem in Waikapiro. And another curveball this year was that we actually had quite a bad bloom over the Christmas period, so about 2 weeks. And we couldn't shake that until after the holidays had finished. And there's a lot of phosphorus in that lake, which I think is related to that oxygen crash. So this, we might still be seeing negative effects of that, that sort of unexpected oxygen crash right early on the piece. So there's that as being a bad thing. But in general, the cyanobacteria have been worse when the air curtain was off. And certainly the times that we've been getting those blooms in Waikapiro has been after a power out, where we haven't been able to keep the thing running, and then we get a bit of a bloom come back quite strongly and quickly. In terms of a good thing, so that picture on the bottom left is little chironomids, little fly larvae that make their tubes down the bottom of the lake. So it doesn't look very exciting, but it is actually quite exciting when we saw that. You won't be able to see there's also a lot of little crustaceans floating around, and that comes from the bottom of the lake. Usually that wouldn't have any oxygen in it, and so by keeping the lake mixed and aerated, we've actually started to see life forms spread right throughout the entire lake bed. So that's really promising. And you don't get that in Tutira. We didn't get that in Waikapiro earlier. So although it's a lot warmer down there, it's also it's providing more life than it has in the past. But in saying that, it does also mean, because it's warmer, the oxygen demand for the entire lake increases. So we're mixing the lake, providing oxygen, but all of that extra life requires oxygen, and so we've actually increased the oxygen demand. And one thing that I've enjoyed is, usually we don't have many options. Algal blooms are out of our control. At least with the air curtain, we've actually got something that we can try to see if we can make things better. But that also comes with a requirement to keep a constant lookout and be ready to try to do things, because we're sort of, we've got the responsibility to try to make sure things are keeping the way that we want them to be keeping. happy to answer any questions on anything by the way as I'm going through. But that's the good and the bad. And so then the question that I think people want me to answer is whether we should be putting an air curtain in Tūtera in terms of from the science perspective. And I'm really undecided on this. So I know that can be frustrating in terms of scientists being uncertain and indecisive. And usually I try not to be, but I haven't managed to get there for this experiment yet. So there's a bunch of reasons why we should and a bunch of reasons why we shouldn't. So why should we? The Waikato trial certainly suggests the mixing is effective, and that was a major question mark. It's like we've tried this before, it didn't work, why would we try it again? Well, we've got this new technology and it actually does seem to be working. So that's one reason to do it. The modelling suggests the mixing will help reduce blooms in Tūtera, and that's still the best guidance for ecological benefits. What goes on in Waikapiro, if you remember that earlier plot, they're quite different lakes and Waikapiro is a lot more enriched. So we can't really use the ecological outcomes in Waikapiro to explain what might happen in Tūtera. I would still fall back on the modelling for that because that was sort of that was the best science. That still is our best science. Observations in Waikapiro confirm oxygen and pH should improve. These are two things that really struggle in Tūtera at times. It's increased the area of inhabitable lake depth, which should increase productivity for fish if it doesn't get too hot. Tūtera should be an easier lake to work with, same reasons. There's less nutrients in there compared to Waikapiro. So we might not have as many problems as we've had with Waikapiro. And this isn't a scientific one, but the comms guys raised that we've got the funding and we said we would. So that's an interesting perspective on why we should. And then there's a bunch of reasons why we shouldn't. One might be that we still get algae blooms, so the water has still got nutrients in it, and we'll have algae growing. It's not going to make algae go away, but it should reduce the frequency of cyanobacterial blooms. So we'll only have less problematic algae, but we still will have algae. And we may still get cyanobacterial blooms. They're not going to disappear completely either. And we're certainly still seeing some in Waikapiro, just less frequent and less extreme than we have in the past. Why shouldn't we? You get curveballs. So, there's been a few things. Fish kill in Waikapiro in January 2018, and we had this recent bloom, like the worst timing, right over the Christmas holidays. So those things might still happen. The entire lake will warm up. That's a given. So the physics, that's one thing we can take from Waikapiro. The physics mean that the bottom water refugia of cool water will disappear in Tūtera if we put this thing in there. And then there's a few other, like the trout fishing in Tūtera has been excellent this year. And it's also been swimmable for the last couple of years. So at the moment, you'd look at that lake and say, well, why would you want to interfere with something that seems to be in a reasonable state? But if you go back to that original plot of cycles, we're on the edge of a good period and we might be coming up to a bad period. It's not common, but there are a couple of other lakes in New Zealand where you do get that 2-yearly cycle where the algae seems to thrive for a couple of years and then go off and then come back and go off. So it's not unprecedented that cycle may exist. But it could also be completely random. So it can't predict that it's going to be a bad year next year.
Makes it hard, eh?
Yeah, makes it hard. Next year may be a bad one regardless of what we do now. So we're monitoring it. There's already there's a waiting pulse of dissolved nutrients at the bottom of the lake. That's going to mix up into the surface waters. So no matter what we do, we're going to have a nutrient supply next year. So that's something to think about. And the swimmability thing. So yeah, Tūtera's been looking pretty good for the last couple of years. So it might not be a great idea to change things right now. So then Jolene got a hold of my slides and made them a bit more artistic for me. So there's 3 voices in my head, that sort of a hesitation, optimism or confidence, and depending on which mood I'm feeling. So if we're being hesitant, you might say, look, we're in a good period right now. There's dissolved nutrients sitting at the bottom of Tūtera. We might be due for a bad year no matter what we do. So if we go and install this air curtain and then independently we have a bad year next year, is that really, I'm just imagining me needing to answer those questions. Wouldn't it really be much fun?
Are you having some sort of therapy for this?
The 3 voices, that's right. But that's, I have to ask questions, so that's not a big thing. But yeah, that's part of, we might want to wait and let it play out, wait till Tūtera gets bad again, and then we do something. Optimism, so forgetting about the possibility of a 2-year cycles, we might not be going back into a bad period, and I certainly wouldn't be recommending an air curtain if we didn't have such, problematic algal blooms and the fish kills. Like, you don't do something this invasive unless you really need to. So if we're being optimistic, maybe the problem isn't as bad as it was, and we don't really need an air curtain after all. And so we can rely on all those other mitigations that Billy spelled out in the strategy, and we can put in an adaptive risk assessment. So again, something I haven't talked to everyone about, but certainly the Tūtera Governance Group, is our current approach of having a permanent swimming advisory in Tūtera isn't very adaptive. Not many other lakes do that. So if we could have a bit more confidence about when it is and when it isn't good to swim, using things like the monitoring buoy, which gives us instantaneous data. Gary Rushworth, one of our scientists, is pretty good at identifying things, so we can rapidly identify whether there's problematic cyanobes in the lake. And if you did have an air, well, yeah, so no, this is no air curtain. So that, there's other source of information that we can use to try to more helpfully tell people when they can and can't swim, and so that means that the lake might be usable without needing to go to such drastic mitigations. But then, if you're being confident, so modelling is still our most robust and predictive tool for Tūtera, and that's telling us that an air curtain will be helpful. And it certainly suggests that there'll be an extreme reduction in those cyanobacteria blooms. And again, if you were confident, you'd say, look, we are due for another bad period, and this air curtain, the air curtain might actually stop it being a cyanobacteria dominated. You'll still have an algae bloom because there's still those nutrients to come up, but might not be cyanobacteria. So in this case, we're saving the day, and we can rely on good communications, and I'll just suck it up in terms of answering difficult questions if things do go bad, and we can manage the optics that way. So that's where my head's at in terms of making a recommendation, and you guys are waiting for one at the end of April, so we'll see how I'm feeling at the end of April. But that's kind of where we're at with the air curtain stuff.
Jim, so Andy, you mentioned that there's a couple of other lakes in New Zealand the same, and I'm aware of a lake in Bavaria that's identical because I went and had a look.
Okay.
And so is there any learning from any of those other people that are having experience in the same things?
Yeah, there certainly is. In terms of there's algal problems all over the world. Air curtains have been tried in many places in New Zealand and over the world. And the modelling that we do, the base of the model is essentially, built on all of those previous learnings. So the mechanisms behind this doing that and this doing that is all based on other lakes. So you come in with first principles and you say, this is what we'd expect it to do. Then you collect data and you calibrate the model to try to tailor it to the lake that you're working on.
So all the other people around the world facing these problems are basically the same science that you're at. There's no one solving this.
Every lake's different,
yeah.
And some people want to do different things. So there are different approaches being tried. There's a bunch of emerging technologies that we haven't got in the pipelines for Tūtera that could be looked at after there's a bit more evidence. I'd suggest waiting for those emerging technologies to be a bit more established. The air curtain is still used by Watercare, so there's 10 lakes that they manage, and that principle of stopping algal blooms, in that case for drinking water supply, so they do that for that reason. Understanding and being able to predict algal blooms is still a bit of a holy grail. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of things which cost a lot of money to monitor. So those 2 years cycles I explained, part of what's going on there might be that you have algae growing, and then you have grazers of that algae. They take a little bit longer to get going, and so you sort of have this decoupled cycle. We don't monitor the grazers, so we don't know about that. Fish play their part, so the ecological dynamics is really complicated, lake specific, and so I wouldn't say that anyone. Yeah,
not the same.
Yeah, they're not the same, but we're certainly this is good science that we've got. That monitoring buoy we've just put in is fantastic. The data that's coming through, we're able to see chlorophyll A and phycocyanin, so the cyanobacteria. We're able to see that every couple of hours at all depths of the lake. So we've got good science behind this, and the modelling that we've done is considered the best.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, Andy. Did the agitator? Was that installed over the summer? And,
it was, yeah.
And that's been useful, or?
Yeah, it has. So the surface aerator, so that oxygen crash we had in January 2018, so because of that we wanted to have a sort of an ancillary system just to create some oxygen refuge in case it happened again. So I put in a frother. That's just like the things you see in wastewater ponds in Central Hawke's Bay. They've got those big frothing things. We've got one of them in there. We haven't had it on the whole time. We've had high algae levels in the lake, not cyanobacteria, but other algae which produce oxygen. And when they're there, there's no reason to have the oxygen going. It's just a waste of power. So, but it has been going, and we've turned it on when the oxygen levels got low, and we haven't had an oxygen crash this year.
Right. My second question is if would we learn anything of great significance if we left things a year for another year of trial in Waikapiro?
So, yeah, so that it'll be good to look at that frother during winter. When algae's in the water and they're generating oxygen, it's quite hard to pick up the pattern. In winter, things are dormant, so the only thing that'll be going on really is that frother. So we'll be able to really focus in on whether that's how much oxygen that's contributing to the system. So
I was thinking more along the lines of would we learn anything more significant about the usefulness of the air curtain if we left it in there for another year?
Yep.
If it was in there, after another year of data coming from that, would there be anything significant we could possibly learn from it?
So the main thing that I'd like to see is what the trout do. So the trout have only been in there for 7-8 months or so, and so if we leave it, and they're too small to pick up on echo sounders, so we've got no idea what they're doing, how big they are. If we wait until this time next year, they will have had over a year in that lake, and we'll be able to understand what the air curtain is doing to them in comparison to what's happening in Tūtera. So that would be useful if you like trout. So just making sure the air... Yeah, so again, trout are one of those divisive things. But yeah, so that's probably the main thing that I think we'll get out of Waikapiro. But otherwise, the algae blooms and the nutrient dynamics that we might expect, they'll just be so specific to Waikapiro. I'm not too sure how much we'll be able to translate over to Tūtera.
So it comes back down to the pros and cons and the confidence level things that you had up there,
yeah,
which should be enough to lead us to a decision one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yep, that's good.
I think, maybe.
Any questions on any other of the hotspots discussed here? If not, would someone
Move the report.
Is that your motion? Second,
Chair.
Comment?
Very comprehensive from all of you, from your team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thanks, Ian. I recall must have been 12 months ago, maybe 18 months ago, having a conversation with you about the frustration about things not happening. And you said to me that once you've got there's some things you get ticked off, and one of them was the funding, you'd be away. And man, you guys have hit the ground running. Your team's hit the ground running on these things, and I'm really, really pleased to see the progress that's been made. So thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? All those in favour of receiving reports, say aye.
Aye.
Accepted. Thank you. If we are planning to meet till 3:30, we will make it through the rest of the agenda.
I have to go.
If people are eager to get out of here, I will triage this agenda.
I have to leave it. I'd like to leave at 3:30, Chair.
3:30? All right. Then let's continue as it is. Number 10.
Okay, so this was a report on our fish kill during maintenance activity at Dartmoor Road. And really, the perspective I want to look at it through is really looking after our environment and our food basket. So, we saw in earlier presentations that, 90-odd% of the wetlands in Hawke's Bay have been removed. And so it's not surprising that in our man-made drainage network, we find a lot of eels and other things. So it's a matter of how we can adapt our maintenance processes to better manage those sorts of organisms. So I really just wanted to give you a quick background of the Heritonga Plains Flood Protection Scheme. So we've got a whole bunch of assets out there, which includes over 200 kilometres of open waterways or drains that have been constructed, and it provides a huge benefit to the community in protecting, Hastings, Napier, and the horticulture and agriculture that occurs on the plains. So it's useful to have a look at the published purpose of the scheme. So there's some, obviously the protection of life and communities is in there. along with protection and enhancement of the ecology and water quality values. So that's a key commitment of ours, and also the protection and enhancement of social and cultural values. So once again, a reminder, that's our published information about why we have this scheme in place. We also sort of don't make it up as we go along. We've got a number of guiding documents that a lot of effort has gone into. It really starts off at the asset management plan, which describes the operations and maintenance of that infrastructure. We also have an environmental code of practice, which generally tells us how to do work on the rivers and waterways, and then more specifically for our main river stems, an ecological management plan, which goes into a lot of detail about working within the environment and enhancing the bird life and other things. Oops. And just a reminder that there is a lot of cultural values built into those ecology plans, and that's part of the education of our workforce as well. So really, to take you through the incident, on the 14th of February, we were doing maintenance in the Dartmoor drain. That's just out of Puketapu. Got a picture. There's a picture in the report there. We do that activity once every 7 to 10 years. So we do 10 to 15 kilometres per year of mechanical excavation out of those drains. In this location, we did a dig and cart because we had a constrained waterway next to a road. We were carting that material directly away, and there is a number of eels killed through that exercise, and we are cooperating with MPI. They're running an investigation into that process, so I won't go into a lot of detail around that. The key point, which we were very quick to publicise, is that all of our maintenance activities on drains was ceased pretty much as of that day, and we've initiated an investigation into improving our methodology, and we won't commence until we've got an adequate standard operating procedure in place. So that's the location there as per the paper, so I guess everyone's pretty familiar. So dug out of the waterway, put into a truck, and then driven down towards Puketapu across the bridge, and then we have a spoil site on the other side of the river. And as part of our operations, we have a number of consented spoil sites around the river network for this sort of activity. So moving forward, as I've said, we've all of our wet drain maintenance is on hold. Created a task team. They'll be going through a desktop review of all of the procedures in New Zealand and some in the UK, and working both with iwi and other stakeholders to work through a better methodology, and also ensure that those solutions are practical. There may be some ongoing stakeholder engagement required. Well, one of the issues that's already brought up is encroachment of farming activities into our access ways. So that will be potentially a significant exercise just to work through.
Sorry, Chris, when you mean encroachment into our access ways, so we've got, that's land that we own, or we've just got...
So we have a right to access at all times, 6 metre easement or 6 metre access way along all of the open waterways that we own. And sometimes we're unable to access those waterways. That leads to either other work practices, such as the dig and cart, in lieu of placing the material on the bank of the waterway.
Yep.
And so what we're highlighting is potentially there's a bit of a stakeholder engagement process around some of that.
Oh, so you think that's because the past practices, it's sort of people got into the habit and they've gone... Yeah, the council never enforces it, so we just won't worry about it.
That's it. It develops over years, and it's an extra.
So it's a re-education type thing.
Yeah, and we just need to work with everyone on that. I don't think it's going to be a major issue, but it's a lot of people to talk to.
It's 6 metres.
Yeah.
This is creeping on me. This is.
Okay.
But always 6 metres can be less.
Yeah. So it's a generalisation, but the point is we need to be access those assets for maintenance without without having farming practices in the way.
All big trees.
Yeah. So look, that's where we're at. We're planning a major planning, environmental training of all our work staff, which includes any changes to the standard operating procedure. And we'll be amending certain documents, and we've asked for a couple of representatives from the local hapu to help us through with that process as well. So that's really it in a nutshell. Happy
Chris,
to answer any
I thought it was
queries.
just worth adding that the MPI investigation is a serious compliance investigation. It's not come and have a look and find out what we're up to. It's literally staff formally interviewed with a view to potentially laying charges against our staff for this. So in the event that does occur, we're in a situation where all of these steps are not just the right thing to do, they will be absolutely required as part of our defence of doing this activity going forward. So that's how serious MPI is taking it.
So we've provided legal representation for all of our staff who've been through that process.
So will they be charged individually or will the council be charged?
We're unsure at this stage. MPI haven't been exactly clear. One is exceeding a catch limit, for example, to an individual, in which case we would have to think about our action if those charges were made against individuals.
Very interesting.
Chair and deputy go to 3 months standard.
I agree with the CE and the chair.
It'd be a bit harsh for the staff because they were just operating on the procedures that they'd been instructed to do. So they were just doing the job. So
that's right. I want to make it very clear the staff were doing what they always do for that particular activity.
Yeah.
So it's not like we can, always sometimes easy to point the finger at someone, but we're very much looking at the asset management group and how we've structured that work from the management perspective.
I'm happy to move acceptance, Chair.
Yeah.
I'll second.
So
With
Graham
the
seconds.
chair of the Environmental Services Committee being the hostage
Nominee.
forward for this.
I just
I
Chair,
could use some downtime in jail.
That's one way to get a holiday.
Are there any more substantial comments on this
I
report?
have a comment. Oh, you have a comment.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
Chair.
move.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say of all the different, crisis or moments or events that we've had happen since I've been sitting around this table, I think the way that the staff have handled this particular issue is probably the best that I've seen happen. We owned up to the issue straight away. We stopped what we were doing and came out pretty quickly with what we intend to do in the future, which is go back and revisit all our operating procedures around the clearance of the drains. And I understand, Chris, that you're also looking at the whole code of practice altogether about how we manage these issues, because it's not just the eels, obviously, it's also other fish and other creatures and things like that, the environment in general we have to look after. So, and the very fact that we're going back and once we get those operating procedures sorted out, we're going to go back and have staff training so that the staff that are actually out in the field understand why they're doing these things, because there is we have a responsibility as a council to look after the environment and biodiversity and how to do these things. So I'm really, really pleased with the response that's been taken here and just want to congratulate Chris for managing that really well. Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
I would just endorse those comments, Chris. I think you've handled this spectacularly well. I mean, it was a tragedy at the time. Nobody wants to kill eels. We just got the processes a little bit wrong, and but now we have taken a really good look at it, and hopefully we're going to get it right in the future. Because one thing for certain, I have been convinced by our man in the field, Dave Paku, who absolutely has convinced me you've got to keep those waterways open. Heratonga is a flood zone, and one day we're going to get a big flood again, and we've got to keep those waterways clean. So there has to be a compromise here, and I think the community understands that, and they really got the big picture. But we can do a bit better, of course.
Mr. Moe.
Yes, this report and explanation was very well received yesterday at the Maori Committee. And my colleague here said if you've got another truckload, you can dump them in his back paddock.
Any other comments? Mover, you finished?
Yep.
All those in favor of receiving the report?
Aye.
Accepted. Liz has a time constraint, so we are going to move to 12 and 13
Thank you.
as the next two items.
Malcolm, could you come forward, please? So, Mr. Chairman, the first one, Malcolm Miller will speak to, and it's a summary of the consented discharges that we have into the marine environment, or more specifically, the significant discharges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a summary, just a quick look at the four largest discharge consents into the marine environment in Hawke's Bay. A look at a quick look at the conditions that attach to them, the processes and the conditions that attach, and then comment on the compliance in relation to those conditions. There's sort of a little bit more text in the back. I tried to bring it into a summary in the table that's there. It's a comment I make in paragraph 5 that generally they're operating within compliance with their resource consents, with the exception of Wairoa. I'll just touch on that later, but I would point out that when I prepared this, the HDC, the compliance report wasn't completed for 2017-18, and I just pulled it up today, it having been completed, and it's actually now reporting that there is low-risk non-compliance associated with the HDC discharge for this past monitoring year. So just looking across the table, I've looked at Napier City, wastewater outfall, Hastings District, Wairoa, and also the Panpac outfall from the timber plant. These are the largest four. Two of them, Napier, Hastings, consents have been recently issued, and they expire in 25 to 35 years' time from the time of the time that they were issued. So 2037 and 2049 they expire. The Wairoa District Council consent is due to expire this year, and they have lodged their application for replacement, and it's with us now. The Panpac consent that I was looking at was has expired in 2017. They've been operating since then under Section 124 while their replacement application was being processed and was going through, ultimately through a direct referral to the Environment Court. And that one actually went to the Environment Court on Monday. Hasn't quite been finalised, but the Environment Court was generally indicating that they were comfortable with the conditions that had been worked through by the mediation process that had preceded that. So two Napier City and Hastings District are consented reasonably recently and have a fairly long life. The other two are coming through a consenting process. So the two that are Napier and Hastings, while they have a long duration, there are review clauses sitting within those consents to say that they will be brought up from time to time to see how they're operating. And the Panpac one, basically that similar approach has been included in what's coming forward in what went to the Environment Court. So probably in all cases, there was always discussion through the submission and hearing process of whether this should endure 35 years or for a long period, what new technology might be coming along that would actually allow things to be operating better, and in some cases maybe allow these activities to actually be taken out of the ocean and discharged in a different way. So particularly with Panpac, that's the test that's basically been put on them on a 10-yearly cycle to look at do a full review of the technology of their systems and report back to the community group that they're required to have as well, basically to account for why they would choose to continue doing what they're doing versus moving to different technology and different discharge. So just going through this table, all systems have levels of treatment. Milli screening for Napier City and Hastings, but also BTF, and both those two have a Rakahore channel, which is making sure that the treated waste, particularly the domestic stream, is going through a land treatment step before it's discharged back to sea. Wairau District Council has an oxidation pond system, and PanPac has described there a primary treatment, then biological treatment, activated sludge and clarification before discharging. So treatment, quite a treatment train there. Discharges for the outfall distance for Napier City is 1,500 metres offshore, HDC 2,750. Wairoa is into the estuary, so it's a very short outfall, and PanPac 2,400 metres offshore, so a distance out to sea. I meant to say initially that all these applications went through a notification process and a hearing process when they were consented, and all three of them have as what I wanted to say, with Napier City, HDC and PanPac went through consultation in advance of actually applying, and in particular had a iwi liaison type process where they spoke with tangata whenua, discussed options, and came partly with solutions that were acceptable to tangata whenua when they applied. And conditions that are then attached are generally requiring reporting back to tangata whenua and involving them in some of the activities in the way of monitoring. Particularly in the case of the PanPac one, there is an intention to involve tangata whenua in the monitoring that follows. And I sort of mentioned that partly because the coastal policy statement, the national policy statement, is asking that there be recognition of tangata whenua values, impact on cultural values and so on associated with any discharges into the environment. And that has generally been part of these processes. I think there's recognition that it certainly is culturally sensitive to be discharging into the ocean, and there's a need for dialogue leading into these applications and ongoing as they're implemented. Quite a lot of conditions are attached to each consent. I haven't gone into detail on those. One I'm pointing out is that there is a requirement for Napier City, HDC and PanPac in their new application to do benthic monitoring. So look at the quality of the fish life and benthic life in the environment and gauge how that's being impacted by the discharge. So that has to occur on a not a annual basis, but on a 5-yearly basis, 9-yearly basis. So there's monitoring to see how the discharge is impacting on the environment.
Can you just explain why they would not do it annually?
It's a major test. It's putting example is putting baskets of mussels into the ocean, so that they're basically living in that environment at different distances, and then taking them in and assessing them and looking at whether they're picking up anything or taking any metals or viruses or anything into them, and assaying them and determining if there are effects. So it's a pretty expensive process to actually do. And I think it's looking at if the system's operating in a consistent pattern, then if things shouldn't change, this will just allow a shot in time every now and then just to see that that's confirmed that effects are okay. So in terms of conditions that are attached, for Napier City, they've been reported as fully compliant in 2017-18, with the exception that there is a leak. They're describing it as a thumb-sized leak in the pipe at about 700 metres offshore. For HDC, where I said fully compliant here, I observed today that it's actually a low risk and compliance, or not a low risk non-compliance. And the things that they were identifying there were that they actually replaced the diffuser in the two years, in the past 2 years, and they actually didn't do a diffuser inspection and report it at the time that they actually put the new diffuser in. So they actually missed a monitoring step at that stage. But I think in discussion they're recognising that it wasn't actually a necessary step, it wasn't compliant with the conditions, but the diffuser was brand new at that point, so they didn't actually do an inspection as required. There was a toxicity test.
Sorry, they put in a new. Does installing something like a new diffuser negate their obligations to be doing monitoring as required under the resource consent condition?
It was basically a dive to make sure the diffuser was functioning as it should. So they were basically installing a new purpose-built structure into the environment.
So rather than coming in and diving to inspect it, they were diving to install the new one, so they were down there anyway.
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, they should have dived, connected it, gone back up to the surface or gone away, then come back and then done an inspection.
No, I can understand. I can understand the logic in that. So essentially, the one dive covers both things, but
it wasn't a monitoring inspection.
Okay, but it's able to be classified as one. And it's on our record as being saying that it's a monitoring.
It's not classified as one, which is why you say it's non-compliant, but it's a low risk.
It's a technical non-compliance. Yeah.
So, and then just moving on to the last two, Wairoa District Council, it is in a state where there are areas of significant non-compliance. At the same time, they're applying for a resource consent. So we're basically looking at those and looking to make sure that in consenting and addressing the process now, they're answering the questions about the non-compliance. And PanPac has been regarded or marked as fully compliant, but as you're aware, there is a leak in that pipe which is being addressed now. So that's all I was going to comment on.
To take questions, Mr. Chairman.
Before I go to you, Councillor, I have two questions of my own. First of all, this seems to me an excellent compilation of where things stand, what is required, what kind of reviews and monitoring will be called for. But so it sort of sets the stage for one question, which is, how will we review this going forward? What next? Now that we see a variety of different timetables and behind this are a whole series of consent conditions and monitoring and so forth. So is this a report that we would expect to get on a semi-annual or annual basis? That's one question. The second is, this is responsive, I think, to what we asked for. I view it as a report on, more broadly, on harmful discharges into the marine environment. And so there are two situations that I would raise a question, why don't we include in this going forward? One is we have still sewage discharge into the Tukituki River, which flows into the marine environment. They simply happen to be upstream from a treatment process and facility, as opposed to two other municipalities that are on the ocean directly. So I would say, for my frame of reference, I'd like to see CHBDC on this in terms of that particular function they fulfill. And the second is AFCO, which is not on the marine environment, but is right there. And like PanPac, why it seems to me that they're similar enough that you would say, well, what are the conditions there? And the same set of issues addressed in the future. So I guess two questions, both of them relate to what next, because I think this is a very good job of getting us to a certain point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and acknowledgement to Malcolm who wrote the paper. In terms of what next, these four that have been referenced in this paper and also Central Hawke's Bay District Council and also AFCO are considered to be major consents, and they are always separately identified in our annual compliance reports. So those are prepared after the end of the financial year, and you'll get one in the Environment and Services Committee meeting in sort of August/September, whenever the appropriate date is. So that's when any updates on conditions or reviews, what's happened during the course of the year, can be referenced into that report. So you've got that annually. Acknowledge Central Hawke's Bay District Council discharge and AFCO. They will be covered in the annual compliance report, though.
Central Hawke's Bay was done last month, last ENS meeting, and the councillors asked for these all to be done.
Councillor Dick.
Sorry, I was away from that one.
That was more, I did report at the last meeting on the wastewater working party. So that was in reference particularly to the fact that they have been had an infringement notice, and we're working through a process of...
Well, there are circumstances like that, but the nice thing about this is that it looks at it through the lens of the ultimate receiving environment, the marine environment, and here are all the various...
And the compliance,
the
compliance report can be presented in that kind of way as well. So we could, we can revisit it at any time, and we could do that if that's how you would like to see it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Malcolm, a couple of questions. One, in terms of Napier, the Pandora pipe, it's about 8 k's long, I understand, is blocked with tallow, but there is at source screening in the scouring plants, and there's milli screening at the treatment plant. Does the fact that that pipe is blocked and out of action, is that a compliance issue or not?
I did look at that. Because it's going through the BTF with the domestic stream and getting treated in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
But the consent allows that there can be a mix of domestic and, what was the phrase, industrial in that waste stream, and it's not specific about what that balance is. I spoke to Napier City and asked them about that and whether it was actually impacting on the that part of the treatment process, and their observation was that it wasn't. So it was something to...
I can remember when that bypass pipe was built quite expensively too, so it must be a bit disappointing. The other thing is that the thumbnail-sized hole in the outlet for Napier, beats me how they can't fix that. Can't they just jam a cork or a rubber plug in it or something?
Chewing gum. Finger.
Honestly, seriously.
Finger.
Well,
chewing gum.
They've indicated that they have attempted to fix it and have failed. I think it's on a join, I believe. But the thing to note is that they are doing some additional monitoring around that to see that. See that there isn't an impact that is unacceptable. We're going to have to go a little bit further and look at incorporating that into their consent and perhaps making sure that the monitoring is sufficient to prove that.
I mean, I'm sure the effect is minimal, but surely a hole that size can be fixed.
Yeah, I can't answer. I just know that. Comments they make is that some of this work is done, they can't actually see it, it's not visible when they're down there, and it's by feel that they're actually doing some of this work.
Under the base of the pipe or something?
I assume it's been detected, but I don't know that it's quite it's where it's located.
Look, it is on a join, and that's the challenge for patching it, and so the conversation we're currently having with Napier City is an amendment to their resource consent to effectively make this consented and legal activity to be discharging 2% of the flow at 700 metres. Now that creates a pretty strong incentive on Napier City to fix this, because it's either fix it or have to go through a consent process, which is a variation to consent, which will have its own issues associated with it. So I've got no doubt that they have every incentive to get this fixed. It is just technically challenging.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a series of questions. I want to break them down to digestible bites. Firstly, continuing on from your observations, Mr. Chair, around the reporting process itself, and I'm interested, Liz, to understand how you intend to report back, because my observations are the same as Councillor Belford's, is that the collection of this information together is very useful and gives an overall picture of what's going on, and I concur with adding in the similar parameters for Central Hawke's Bay as well would complete that picture for us. So we're treating that as a global report, and I hear what you're saying about reporting back as a part of the monitoring processes, but can we have a discrete, comprehensive report, including Central Hawke's Bay, which aggregates all of these consents together and is essentially reported together? And I'm going to make another suggestion, is that we do drill down further to the consent conditions themselves and either place them in some sort of order and put some sort of traffic light indicator against them, so that not only council but the wider public has got a very clear picture of our whole monitoring regime around them. So that's a suggestion for the next report. So if you could take that into mind. Can I just go then to your report itself, and there's a few questions to ask. I just want to go firstly to the Napier and Hastings discharges and just confirm how far apart are their respective fields, their respective mixing zones. Do you know? They're out here somewhere.
Yeah.
My calculation is that Napier's is something like 9,000 square metres, or nearly a hectare, and then Hastings is about 50,000 square metres. So, but how far between them is the separation? Do you know?
The pipes actually come out this way, and they're very close to being able to be connected. Remove the problem.
Sure.
You're probably the same distance, probably from Ravens down to. You're probably talking 5-6 I'd say.
5-6 K between the two.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's no sense of a cumulative effect between the two.
Never the twain shall meet, Councillor.
Mixing the poos and
Our two-tie doesn't meet their two-tie anyway, is it right?
You could look at some of their monitoring, because they're independently monitoring north and south of their discharges. So you could look to see.
The good thing about that is Napier's doesn't smell, so that's useful. Just going to the your paragraph 6, and going to what Councillor Dick mentioned, the blockages to the pipework from Pandora. Is that pipework part of the consenting process? Councillor Dick nearly got to it, or the answer's nearly got to the answer for Councillor Dick, but are they in fact part of the consent?
No, I don't consider they are. So these consents are basically addressing the discharge, but it takes you back to they're describing all their treatment that's going on site.
Yes.
to get to the quality of the discharge.
Sure.
So we hold them to their discharge process.
Yes.
And the quality of the outfall, of the discharge at the outfall.
Is there any implication though if there was discharge from those points? We've had those discharges directly into the Ahuriri estuary.
Yeah.
Is that a different matter?
I would say yes.
Thank you. So moving to paragraph 11, it says the diffuser is to be inspected in order to ensure its maintenance in good condition. Is that who does the inspection and reporting? Is that Napier City do that, or do we do any inspection?
Napier City will contract a provider to do
Sure.
that. Yeah.
And they report that in their consenting requirements.
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking just further down in paragraph 11 at the Benthic survey to be carried out, and there's quantitative microbial risk assessment, QMRA, risk to fish at Town Reef. So firstly, the evaluation and the benthic testing is done at certain points beyond the mixing zone, by the sounds of it. Yep. And where is that report from Napier City? Have we got? Do they send us that report? Have we got it?
I didn't cite it, but I saw a reference to say it's available on request. I couldn't actually see it in our files, but that doesn't mean to say we don't hold it. But
sure. Can we get a hold of that and just
yes,
we're fully understanding of what's involved with that? What else was I going to ask you was
your PIN number?
I thought you were going to ask if we got a report on shellfish health in 2016. Why, in paragraph 13, are we just getting around to understanding the result?
I'm coming to that, Mr. Chair. Thank you anyway.
Just helping you.
Just thank you. So the reported leak at the outfall doesn't make for any compliance issue? You're saying they're fully compliant, but I saw that.
They were fully compliant last year for the last full 12 months. Now that we're aware, an 18-19 year of a minor leak, they probably wouldn't reach that status this year.
Sure.
So it's just becoming aware of it more recently than the last full compliance report.
Sure. Okay. Well, so you're saying that the leak can't be attributed to the 17-18 years, so therefore compliant in that year. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. But now we get to the Chair's observations around paragraph 13. Need to follow up the findings of the QMRA is currently carrying out a study of mussels examined. So what's the relationship between that examination of the findings and the report requirement in 2016? How does that happen?
I can answer that. So the 2016 report suggested there was an elevated norovirus risk at the Town Reef, and as a consequence of that, we required further sampling to be undertaken because it was there was some scientific uncertainty as to whether that risk is genuine. And so in conjunction with Hawke's Bay DHB, Napier City Council was asked to undertake more sampling. And so what's referred to here is the subsequent as opposed to the 2016 consent requirement to undertake that.
Sure, but it begs the question, though, James, as to if this is 2016 report, you haven't seen it, our compliance team haven't reported it. What happened?
Yeah, so I'm 99% sure that our coastal scientist has seen that report and was in discussions. What Malcolm's saying, for the purpose of preparing this paper, he did not cite that report, but I'm aware of an exchange between our coastal scientist, Napier City Council and Hawke's Bay DHB, and I've had a conversation myself with the Medical Officer of Health about this. And so I know there's been a whole body of exchanges about the risk and what we need to do to understand it more, and Napier City is currently doing that study.
Okay, that's fine. If you could indulge me one more question, Mr. Chair. I just want to get, perhaps addressing this to you, Liz, we're building a picture of the whole impact on the environment, the coastal and marine environment. Have you got the resources and the people with the specific expertise to address what's going on here? What we've had is somewhat mechanical observation of the consents, but we don't seem to have, well, I don't know, you may be able to tell me, have lifted that up and said what is going on and what have we got to do to make things better? What do we need to do here?
Yeah, good question. I would say that there is a need for a lot more comprehensive monitoring being undertaken by us around infrastructure, and particularly territorial authority and other large consent holder infrastructure such as AFCO and PANPAC and so forth. That is something that we are aware of as part of our priorities going forward, and I would always argue that we don't have enough resources. I'll just keep trying my luck every year probably. But it is a priority for the compliance monitoring team for the coming 12 months at least, to look at a much more holistic packaging around pipes and infrastructure, etc. It hasn't been necessarily considered on the basis of a common receiving environment, which is really where we're getting to with the marine environment. It's more been looked at as per an individual consent holder, whether that be Napier City or Hastings District or whoever. However, from this discussion and from the points that was made by the chairman, I think we can actually take a look at when we're doing our compliance monitoring reporting from a receiving environment perspective rather than an input perspective. And it'll be a different way of having to think about and prepare reports, and it may need some additional resource. I don't really know yet until we've tried it. But that's the kind of thing I would think. Yeah.
Look, from what I've observed is that these monitoring reports routinely get referred to Anna Madaray-Smith, our senior coastal scientist. I think she's got a pretty good picture of the impact of these activities and what we know from their monitoring. And while Liz, is keen to continue to build resources, I think since the Havelock North water incident, we have significantly lifted our game in this area. And in the long-term plan, you provided us with more resources, and so we've grown the compliance team this year, and next year, in the next financial year, there's funding set aside to grow it again. So our capability's growing. We've understood where we've been weak in the past following Havelock North. There is an increasing focus in this area. But look, the marine environment is a third of our whole territorial area, and we could continue to build science capability in that area. I think we've just got to balance against all the other science priorities, etc.
But with all this sampling and so forth that is going on and being captured by other people, analyzed by other people, then presumably available to us, do we have the science capability to be looking at it all in a timely way and drawing the conclusions we need to?
And look, if the simple answer is if we don't, we buy it in. I mean, the consent team have got the ability to bring in consulting expertise and horsepower. It's always a challenge. We don't have scientists poised waiting to kind of respond to these things all the time. We've just entered into a better and hopefully more or less reactive way of working with the regulatory team, with a level of service agreement between regulation and science. I think the science is able to be reasonably agile and adaptive, and if we can't support it in-house, we can get the right people in to support it externally on an as and when required basis, really.
So if Anna opened her cabinet, we wouldn't have fallout of it. 13 years of past benthic surveys and so forth that have never been looked at.
No, unfortunately, because we haven't had the resourcing. We've significantly upped the resourcing in our marine science space, so we're starting to build that understanding now.
Can the report be received?
More questions, I think.
Just very quickly, Chair, it talks a little bit about it here. I'm just wondering, what is the status of the Water District Council application? Have we got enough info? Have we processed it? Or is it proceeding? What's happening?
We've received it, so Section 88 step is it's sufficient there to receive and start the process, but we've certainly got some questions, and we have asked through Section 92 for specific answers to questions that have arisen from looking at the application.
But we're fully engaged, is what my
yes.
question.
We're fully engaged to the extent that the Chief Executive of the Wairoa District Council is sitting behind us, and he is.
We're going to handcuff and keep
So Stephen has driven down this afternoon to meet with Liz and I specifically on the processing of this consent and the current issues with respect to their wastewater plants. So, and he's done that proactively to ensure that we are working together.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So we had a question pending here from Mike.
Yeah, a question. You'll probably be pushing this on to the Maori Committee, and I know they'll have great interest in this. And also, because it's 2 months' time in June, there'll be an update, especially for our very keen Wairoa delegates.
They're very keen.
Yes.
And thank you for the report. They will find it very interesting. If you can include, as the chairperson said, the Central Hawke's Bay as well.
Would you like to move?
I'd like to remove the report.
We've got more questions.
Councillor
Seconded.
Bailey.
I'll second. Yeah, but I think
I'd
Paul's got
just
a question.
like to make
He
a
wants to leave
comment,
the room.
and that is that hey, things are not all bad. Things get better all the time. It's less than 25 years ago since Napier and Hastings discharged raw sewage through ocean pipes, and all sorts of nasties regularly turned up on the foreshore. So we're a hell of a lot better off now than we were then.
Mr. Chair, I'm significantly heartened by the response from staff today. Having read the report, there are questions that keep bubbling up to the surface as a result, and I'd be certainly interested to receive the 2016 report, so that's at least tabled in the public arena. I would say, notwithstanding the comments from Councillor Dick, whose experience is a valid one, we improve the infrastructure all along, but we are at a point where we're simply, the community at large will not accept the practices of the past, and in fact they won't accept the practices of the current situation. They're not acceptable to have the level of non-compliance that's going on, has gone on, continues. I think we need to have this level of reporting so that the public is very clear that this council is responding. I think the lessons of Havelock North are such that we need to be absolutely transparent, open, and make that information accessible to the public so that they can see that this sort of response is continuing. Mr. Chair, I'd make this comment that it is not acceptable to have the level of discharge and incursion into the coastal marine environment that we've got now. Despite the overtures to the effect that dilution takes place, having been down to the mouth of the Ngāroro, etc. in recent times, I'm not interested in having fish out of that environment. I wouldn't eat them there from that environment. Maori have a lot of concern about that. We've got up to the north in Wairoa. You simply wouldn't risk taking shellfish or seafood from that environment under the current conditions. We've got to act, and this is the opportunity to at least demonstrate that we're over this problem, all over it, and we're working hard at it. And then finally, Mr. Chair, in response to Ms. Lambert's view on resources, if she were to request any additional resources in this area, she would at least get one councillor very vigorously supporting her in that. These resources are needed to examine the receiving environment in total with the right expertise, and I'm sympathetic to compliance staff actually bearing the burden of compliance under-resourced. If that's the case, there ought to be a very focused application of resources in this area to make sure we know what we're doing, know what we're saying, and we can insist on our territorials responding accordingly. So, Mr. Chair, I look forward to the next report, the next iteration of this report with its amendments and updates to get this equation right.
Amen. Councillor Bailey and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say that I'm concerned about the optics around us continuing to allow the continued thumb-sized leak coming out of the Napier City Council discharge pipe. The only thing that's saving us from it being another Panpac incident is the fact that it's further out to sea than what Panpac's was, because it's exactly the same scenario. And it just seems really unfair to me that we allow a consent holder to have a discharge in breach of their consent because they're not supposed to be having having these discharges where they are. They're supposed to be out where the diffuser is. That's what their consent says. So as far as I'm concerned, they can start to bloody comply with it or do something about it, which may or may not be applying for an amended consent. But this is an issue that's been ongoing for some time, and we appear to be no further ahead. I'm really disappointed in that. But I'm sure that there'll be some solution come from, you think about it, a thumb size is basically having your garden hose on full yakka 24/7 and discharging this treated sewage into the marine environment. That to me is, we should be taking action far more quickly, or some action should be taken far more quickly. I don't know what it is, but it's just, so we're just lucky that it's, like I say, it's not visible from shore for people to be getting upset about it.
Mr. Wilson.
In a slightly lighter vein, Chair, I'll take this up with Mr. Miller after the meeting, but if you could tell me which side of the Wada River mouth the mussel baskets are.
I'm there, sorry.
They're actually right cheap, pretty priced at Countdown. Get some before we go home.
I think we've exhausted comments on this. We have a motion to approve, accept the report. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Accepted.
Pan
Pack.
Thank you. Look, I've put this paper on for your information because I gave you a verbal update at the council meeting only 2 weeks ago and found out literally like 48 hours later that things had changed. So I just really wanted to give you an update on another delay that has occurred and the reasons why and what PanPac are doing about it. I have.
Hello.
I've not had any more information from PanPac to confirm or not whether or not the work has been carried out, so I'm sorry, but as soon as we do know, I'll send out an email to you. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just that reference to being in the Environment Court on Monday, PanPac reported to the court there that they still hadn't completed fixing the leak. The court was quite concerned about the leak, and for having resolved pretty well the whole package and having conditions, etc., all agreed to, they weren't happy to sign it off until they were satisfied that the leak was going to be addressed. So they've actually asked for, they want to know the timing of the repair, and they basically want a condition worded to be attached to this consent before they will look to grant the final document. So they've given PanPac and ourselves 2 weeks to come back with a proposed condition, and that's intended to specifically state when the leak will be fixed. And in that discussion, the fix is not just about, or the conversation is about a replacement pipe. So it's looking that they will repair and then look at a longer term solution to prevent it recurring.
Any reactions to that? Comments? Okay. We'll accept, move the report. Councillor Wilson.
I'll second that.
Councillor Graham, second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Last item on the agenda. Thank you.
No interest at this end of the table, Chair.
I thought I was going to get tired. We're all out, didn't you?
So, Chair, Kathleen's going to come up and run through a presentation. Kathleen, if you want to come up and get your presentation set up. This is especially for Councillor Graham. Look, unfortunately, it's at the end of the day, but this is an example of some really innovative tools that the science team have pulled together, and I should say not the team, but Kathleen in particular, on her own, using her own initiatives, and recognising that outdoor burning is something that happens. We're trying to figure out how can we provide good advice for people doing it so that we absolutely minimise as best as practical risks associated with it. So Kathleen's going to quickly run you through the work she's been doing, which we're particularly proud of. Thanks, Kathleen.
I might, for the sake of brevity, just fire it up and just skip this part. Just
Fire it up.
It does, unfortunately, it is on it's on kind of in a testing environment at the moment, in a public a public free website, so it is really quite slow. So that's one thing we need to sort out, and if we go ahead with it, put it on a commercial server. Essentially, it's in response to this issue of outdoor burning and the fact that in our rules they're allowed to do it for purposes of removing diseased material and for orchard redevelopment. And it's allowed to do it under certain weather conditions, and that's that it's the wind speed is less than 10 kilometres per hour, and the wind direction isn't towards the air sheds, and that in their good practice guide that there isn't a temperature inversion in place. So it's been obvious at times that this is happening under the wrong sort of weather conditions, and so they've asked us to can we help them identify the right conditions. So that was when they came to ask us. We thought we would pull this together, and it is an application that is designed hopefully to do that. It uses our climate stations. It's one of the things they requested is that when you open up this app that it gets your location, so hopefully that's not quite us, is it? It varies on what platform it's close, but you can drag it and say to make sure that it is at your location. So we go out back of Hastings somewhere.
About somewhere on George's
Drive.
George's Drive. Very infamous place for
Always
burning
George's
things.
Drive.
2-3 something or 3-2 something. Somewhere over there.
Let's have a burning there.
It's just down a bit.
But you could go there because there's a lot of trees that are pulled out today, I noticed, that are due to be burnt just a little bit not far from you.
I saw them.
Yeah.
It's the effigies he's against.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, it's quite slow. So there's a little, while you're thinking that it's not doing anything, I've got a little status bar here to tell you it is actually thinking about stuff, and it's pulling data in from all our weather stations and interpolating to that position. No, it will keep going. As I say, it's if you're doing it sort of on your desktop, it's a lot quicker. So I think having your own server should hopefully fix this. Otherwise, you'll be dying a death waiting for it to do its thing. Other things that they requested was that there was a downloadable report that they could put in their Good Agricultural Practice Guide. There's a little download button once it's cracked up and done its thing. So this is it. And it never says go for it. So it never says go ahead and burn it. It either says don't burn, and that's often based on, in this case, now this is something, in this case, a colour code's what's wrong, and in this case it's suggesting a temperature inversion, and that's a problem that I've identified, and that it's been using Crownthorpe and Bridge Par, which during last winter seemed quite a good indication of the temperature inversion, because Crownthorpe is at 200 metres, Bridge Par at surface level. And that's okay in winter when there's not a sea breeze, but Crownthorpe is quite a way inland, and so if there's kind of a sea breeze, then the inland ones can actually be cooler than that height. But in the meantime, we've installed another temperature sensor much higher up on the Bridge Par mast. So, and I'm finding that's probably a better use for the assessing inversion. So that's yet to go into this version. One thing.
How high do you have to be in the up for the temperature for the inversion?
Really, it varies depending in the winter on how strong it is, kind of thing.
What's the measuring point you want?
Even,
Will a measuring point at the top of Bluff Hill or halfway up to Martha?
Bluff Hill. Bluff Hill's good. The mast is only 10 metres, but you can get that temperature inversion overnight just with that 10 metres. But ideally, it would be a bit higher. It would be higher than that. Bluff Hill, is quite perfect really for that kind of thing. And so once it's given the status, they need to kind of look at it. Even when it says caution, it's because they need to assess the wind direction. So there's a little plough model from their property giving them an indication of which way their smoke would go. There's just graphs of how the day has progressed. So they might be able to see a bit of a trend on how things are going. You can do also a timeline for the day of the status of each hour. So essentially it's been a bad day all day. And as mentioned, and say our compliance guys can go back in time to see how a particular day has gone, or what this particular tool had said the day had gone for a particular area. And as I mentioned, they can do a download, which I'm hoping is...
Kathleen, does it store people who go onto the site and check? So say someone goes on, they're told don't burn, and yet they do?
Well, that's if we got a complaint, and so that compliance were alerted that was happening, then they would probably go to this tool, see what the status was, and see.
The question was different. If, for example, I was out there on the Heraldon Plains and I dial up on my phone with the app, and I looked at it and it said don't burn, but I went away and burned anyway. Could the regional council look at its log and see that my cell phone made a connection and see?
Oh, I'm not sure about
that. Was what the question was. Could you then trace who had been onto the site, downloaded what information at what time, and what did they tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to ask our IT whether that's...
Could be just spyware.
Might have privacy implications.
The flip side of that, though, Rick, would be if I was an orchardist and used the app and was thinking about burning, I would print it out and then go, because that could use as evidence, say, here's the evidence I got to say that it was okay at the time.
Yeah.
That's why Kathleen was saying it never says, what did you say?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. It's always a caution. Yeah.
Because the other, so there's one thing I was thinking about was, if I went in and checked, does it tell me when? Would it be useful to have an option in there, so like you go in and went and check, and you actually click yes, I'm going to light the fire now, so that anyone that goes in, say, an hour later, they can go, actually someone just down the road's starting something up, so that there might be two or three in close proximity.
There probably could be a facility where people could register their burns, perhaps.
It was just a thought. What was the other thing?
So Rex could run around and take readings at fires, and if it says, don't burn.
Because that's the other challenge we've got.
Call them in.
That's the other challenge I suppose we've got, is that you could go in at 8 o'clock in the morning and it goes, yep, there's no real bad things in there, but so you light your fire, but by the time 4 o'clock in the afternoon comes around,
that's it, because it's only hour by hour, and even sub hour will probably be useful, but at the moment our climate sites come on an hourly basis, so there are a whole lot of limit. I mean, I don't think it would probably stand up in a court of law, if you're trying to, but it's just really an indication for the person who's doing the burning to have an understanding of kind of what the conditions are at the time. And that's it's just a one-page JPEG that they can put in their folders.
When you did the requirements for a burn, I see that you've got a maximum airspeed, which is quite low. Normally when you're trying to diffuse things, volume is quite important. So if you had a fire going and you wanted to have less smoke hanging around the place, surely a 60-knot southerly would make sure it was gone a long way away.
Yeah.
Why have you ruled out?
This is what's in the... I've only put 10 kilometres because that's what's in the air plan.
I'm just asking, so 10 kilometres. So if you had a 60-knot southerly blowing through and you lit a fire, then the smoke's just gone and whisk, Why have we got such a low airspeed?
There's... You'd actually be surprised because how often it is below 10 kilometres per hour. It's actually really quite surprising. It's only for like 2 hours today that this has been, the wind speed has been in that bracket.
So Kathleen, just clarifying, I think you said that the policy has a certain wind speed.
Yeah.
So the policy kind of dictates that below this threshold is okay, and above your 60 knots is
Well,
not okay.
yeah,
Is that right?
generally it's below that 10 kilometres per hour, it's considered kind of too still. And so, yeah, you want above 10 kilometres per hour. But then in terms of a fire hazard, I think generally the guidance literature I look at is like 20, you don't want it more than 25 kilometres per hour. So there's that window there, there's kind of an upper limit and a lower limit. And yeah,
Kathleen,
between 10 and 25.
It's all very wonderful, but as a person who lives in this environment, it doesn't mean anything. It's wonderful technology and I get that. But you're talking to fruit growers. Are you talking to them about burning green wood?
We do try to get that with those sorts of messages out, but...
Well, it's not messages, it needs to be the law. Because the fruit growers, I've had discussions with them on this, and they are right. The ones that are doing a really good job leave the wood for a long time, for 3 months, and when they burn it, and they proudly, text me and say, "Look at this fire." And actually, the husband of the secretary, the chairwoman, he accosted me and showed me a whole lot of photographs. He left the wood for 5 months, and when he burnt it, you couldn't see any smoke. So what you've done here, and I don't mean to be too critical, but you've got a situation where they can burn, and if the wind speed's right and flies straight over my property, they're fine. Well, they're not fine. I'm quite disappointed with our approach here because, I was hoping we were going to have a very aggressive conversation with the fruit growers, and now I'm going to have to do it more privately. And I'm thinking I'm going to go home tomorrow and ring my lawyers and say, can I prosecute somebody for putting smoke over my property? Because the regional council's not helped me in this endeavour, and I don't want smoke over my property on a Sunday when I'm in the garden.
The lawyer will say, how much are you prepared to pay, Rex?
No, well, it'd be interesting how much the other people are prepared to pay. How much are they prepared to pay? Because they don't like it when I go round to them and I go onto their properties and I take photographs. They don't like it. And I've talked to the fruit growers. If they burn dry wood, it's not an issue. And all the growers that do that, and as Debbie's pointed out, I see there's a whole lot of trees just dropped close to me now. And are they going to leave it to... So I have to sweat it out and say, are they going to let it dry or are they going to burn it? And, so much so that I'm raving here a bit, but the guy who does all the professional things, he actually burns at night if it's around me because he doesn't like me assaulting him in restaurants and cafes and bars, which I do. So, you are actually, the regional council is actually abandoning the people on the Heretaunga Plains, saying this wonderful technology, but doesn't do anything except wind speed. Well, the issue is greenwood, which is potentially carcinogenic. That's the issue. And when you go up to Marta Peak and you look down at 11 fires, which I went up with Peter Bevan, 11 fires, and those photographs which we've taken on the inversion layers, we are essentially poisoning the people of Hawke's Bay potentially. And there's a lot of them really hacked off. Well, now I'm going to have to galvanise them and put all my other work aside and get on with this, and I'm going to. Because I'm really annoyed at this.
Excellent question.
Would it be fair to say, Ian, that our challenge as the council is that the Regional Resource Management Plan allows orchards to do this under the rules, right? So we've got a review of the Regional Resource Management Plan coming out next year, kicking off. I think it's 2020. It's due to start. So this should be on the tickler box of things that needs to be.
But the fruit growers are prepared to. The leaders of the fruit growing industry are prepared to only burn dry wood. Yep. It should have been in here.
So they're not arguing with Councillor Graham's point of view, but I guess there's two parts to it. One, here's a bit of science and a tool to help good people trying to do the right things get the best outcome, and that's the way we viewed the tool. your points are completely valid, and the way that we would address that is not through anything Kathleen would necessarily do, but through a revision of our policy. If you feel that the industry are not responsive and are not responsible, or most of them are, but if there are laggards that need to be brought into line, your tools exist in law. You can create law through policy to direct them to do things. And that might be your next step.
In a year's time, do I have to spend the winter overseas?
I do believe that dry wood is even possibly in the rule, certainly in their good practice guide, that they should be.
It's in the good practice guide.
Should be drying the wood.
And a lot of them are doing it, burning only dry wood, and you can't see the smoke. So you could have, if people adhered to that, we wouldn't have an issue.
So we're talking about 0800 pollution line?
Oh yeah, I do. I'm quite active.
Yeah.
The pollution line's actually pathetic, because if you ring it on a Saturday or Sunday, I've got 5 or 6 different people. One time I got the fire station. Nobody answers it. I've moaned to James about that. Pollution line needs to be seriously looked at, and I will ring it every time I see a fire.
What do they say when
Have
you?
done.
What do they say to you when they ask you what your name is?
I've never done it. Only once did I drop my name. No, they take your names. It's the thing. You never say.
Please call it. Rex Grant.
So just reinforcing that really the exercise, the point of this exercise was to get good people doing the right thing, get an even better outcome. So giving them the tools to get a better outcome.
It's the presentation of a tool, but we need to address this per se.
Yeah.
We need to address this because it actually affects sales. It actually affects, because I'm out there calling them polluters, they don't like it. But they actually, when they go up the peak themselves and look, they actually realise, it's all the big growers are saying, holy mackerel, we've got to stop this.
Can I suggest that we put when anybody downloads this app, there's a little wee sort of infomercial comes on before it goes on, and we have the chairman saying, the good crew, you will do A, B, C, and D before you can light the match.
Dry wood.
Is your wood dry? Is it the right place? Is this? That's it.
So
This is from the chair.
And there are also links to the good practice guide and various versions of it.
So we refer to Rule 19E of the HBRC Air Plan. Given our infatuation with minor plan changes, what's involved in creating Rule 19F that says it's illegal to burn green wood?
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Is that a big deal?
In theory not, but we'd need to involve the policy team in that discussion. And probably what it needs, it probably needs a bit of a comprehensive review to say, look, what have you got? Is it still fit for purpose? Does it adequately deal with the laggards? Is it best practice compared to the rest of the country? How would you fix the package? Bring it forward. Look, I think...
Well, Tom, can you send me that, because I'll push that. Look, we have a unique situation here at Tonga. We have this huge inversion. Other people don't. You go out in the hills, they don't have it. I mean, I doubt if you have an inversion on the top of
Canterbury,
the Napier. Yeah, they have it. But inversion has been the most wonderful thing we've had because it helps us fight frosts. But we have, the Heritonga Plains is unique. It's got 130,000 people live there. It's intensely populated. You cannot burn in Bolzano. I mean, this is primitive. We're doing all these fancy things, but this is primitive activity, and we've got to stop it. So, we've got a lot of people living there. We're burning carcinogenic things, it's just unbelievable.
I suggest that the chair give notice of a motion to the next council meeting.
Yeah, I think so.
That Rule 19F new Rule 19F be inserted in the policy, that only suitable dry wood will be burned. And any person who burns green wood will be prosecuted mercilessly by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council Compliance Team.
I would love that.
Let's go.
We'll be forced into a smoky room. Incarcerated in a smoky room. Would somebody care to move that we accept this report?
I'll move that, Chair.
I'll second it.
Would you like to comment any further?
No, I think enough's been said.
Okay, you?
I welcome the Chair's initiative on this, and I look forward to many more resolutions.
Terrific.
Crusading chairman, that's what I like to see it.
And we do thank the initiative here of our staff, despite the chairman's resistance. All those in favor of accepting the report? Aye.
Yeah.
Done, okay. And I think we just had one minor item from Debbie.
Very quick, so just a reminder, you've all received an invitation to the,
Well, no, it's not in there now,
Invitation.
but it's certainly in the...
to the field day tomorrow, the Whenua Trophy competition, which is at Guavas. And just for those of you who haven't quite made the connection, this property is one of the Tranche 2 applicants. So for those of you who have very strong thoughts on Tranche 2, well, this is an excellent opportunity to get on site and see for yourself. The host, Bob Cottrell, has especially encouraged me to invite all of my councillor colleagues. So we look forward to seeing some of you there.
Great. Can you put in my apologies, Stevie? I've got a water, what is it called? The water something committee?
Joint Drinking Water Committee.
Trans 3 water.
No, the Three Waters group.
Oh, Three
I
Waters.
said Trans 3.
Trans 3.
Trans 2, yeah, Trans 3.
Oh,
Too fast.
Declare the meeting closed.
Can we have a closing statement?